Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. I do appreciate this opportunity to speak to you here. Thank you for the kind invitation to OECD. I'd like to start by inviting my colleagues, Lilian Macharia and Liam Odia, to the stage. Joining us remotely is Gaurav Godwani. Unfortunately, due to logistical issues, we were not able to have him here in person. Please. Well, thank you very much for joining us in this session where we'll try and discuss a little bit about what machine learning can do to strengthen integrity in climate action. Although this discussion centers around climate-related initiatives, the principles and technologies can be applied across all sectors. In this session, we will discuss how the Green Climate Fund is applying machine learning to manage both integrity and project risks, and to explain how CivicDataLab uses analytics and intelligent automation capacities to promote civic engagements in India. It is our hope to catalyze a discussion on how we as anti-corruption practitioners can leverage technical innovations to promote accountability, reduce vulnerabilities, and inform risk mitigation strategies. My name is Albert Lee Halaha. I am the ad interim head of the Independent Integrity Unit of the Green Climate Fund. To provide a little bit of background, the GCF is the largest pure climate finance mechanism of the Paris Agreement. It is mandated to support developing nations achieve their climate goals. Thus far, the GCF has over 200 projects in 127 developing nations and a portfolio value of $45 billion. Notably, it's without fail that at any given day, there will be news reports of devastating climatic disasters from sinking island nations such as Tuvalu, Kiribati, and the Solomon Islands due to, raising sea levels, to devastating floods in Pakistan, and extreme heat conditions that lead to wildfires in Australia and drought conditions in East Africa. Due to the complexity of climate financing, and particularly vulnerable to violations of fraud and corruption, Apologies, I've got allergies. Due to the complexity and urgency of climate financing, and particularly vulnerable to integrity violations, such as fraud and corruption, there is a consistent call for climate financing due to the urgency of the climate conditions. Now, therefore, the GCF donor countries and intended recipients have a vested interest in safeguarding the resources and ensuring successful project implementation. To this end, the GCF has established mechanisms to mitigate potential risks. The board has established the IIU to investigate occurrences of prohibited practices, such as fraud and corruption, and to prevent and institute preventative measures to mitigate potential integrity violations. And one of the most effective and efficient ways is to leverage on technical innovation and apply it to answer key questions such as, what are my vulnerabilities? Where are my vulnerabilities? And how we as organizations can respond to these vulnerabilities. The potential to revolutionize transparency and open data initiatives are remarkable. For instance, in procurement and contracting, machine learning modules can analyze large volumes of contract data, including bid submissions, awarded contracts, and financial transactions to detect patterns of overpricing, collusive bidding, or suspicious payments. By analyzing anomalous information and considering factors such as non-competitive bidding, repeated contract awards, or inflated pricing, machine learning can identify high-risk procurements and allow us an opportunity to conduct further investigations on these issues. Through text mining and natural language processing, machine learning can be used to monitor public discourse and news and social media to help identify emerging corruption cases, gauge public perception, and assist in determining areas to focus our anti-corruption efforts. Similarly, this creates opportunities to monitor public records, financial data, and media sources to flag potential conflict of interest transactions by politically exposed persons or illicit connections, and by indicating and detecting integrity risks. By taking the corpus of organizational data coupled with publicly available information, investigators can apply machine learning to uncover hidden connections and networks, potentially identify links between individuals and organizations. This can help investigators map out questionable networks and target their efforts more effectively. The IIU has made significant headway in data analytics and risk assessment, particularly around natural language processing to automate extraction of relevant information from legal documents, contracts, audit reports, and regulatory frameworks. Although the IIU has yet to fully capitalize on the capacities, we recognize the opportunities and are building structures to get us there. Today, we are honored to have with us a fantastic panel that will bring some insights from differing perspectives on integrity-related issues, project risks, and accountability. Our first speaker is Liam Odia, our lead data analyst with the IIU, and will speak a little bit more about specific implementation. Liam is a data engineer and a data scientist with experience managing software engineering teams in fintech companies. A graduate of MIT, Seoul National University, and the University of London SOAS, Liam has built the infrastructure, services, and machine learning modules that comprise the integrity due diligence platform of the Green Climate Fund's IIU. Liam is responsible for discovering fundamental relationships between financial instruments and integrity risk ratings, the subject of a forthcoming paper. Liam, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, boss. So I'm going to talk to you today about integrity risk ranking using machine learning. But first, what's the backdrop to our work at the Independent Integrity Unit? Well, we work in climate finance, which is a new area in which integrity risk exposure is quite severe due to complexity. And nobody really has a good set of countermeasures. And at the GCF, we face some challenges which complicate things further. So we have a hard cap on the number of staff that we're allowed to hire across the whole organization, and that affects us in the integrity unit. So we can't hire that many specialists. Although the number increases with each year, it doesn't increase in proportion to the amount of financing that we have issued. A lot of people think we're a UN organization. We're not. Even though we were set up by the UN, we aren't part of the UN, and we report to them, but we don't have the nice little blue passport there that would allow us to go into the field and investigate our own projects, investigate any issues there. So we can't do that. And most importantly, there is a policy context around disclosures, which is material to our work. So if you take money from, let's say, the World Bank, you are committing to provide them with disclosures when you take that money, but the same is not true of the GCF. So we have quite limited visibility into our own investments. And as such, we would benefit from a remote monitoring capability that would help us overcome the workforce constraints that I've just mentioned, and perhaps something that could provide as much visibility into our investments as possible. That would be very attractive to us. Step fourth, machine learning. But before we get into the details of what we've actually done, what is machine learning? In traditional modeling, you put your data and a model into your computer, and your computer gives you some answers. But in machine learning, you put your data and some answers into your computer, and the computer gives you a model. And what's different? You need the answers, at least some answers, at the beginning before you have the model, which means that you need a different set of data to the data you want to make predictions about. However, in some ways, machine learning models are just like other models. They're not automatically good. They don't create value just by existing. So when are they useful? They're useful when you have a decision to take and you want to optimize that decision. And so for us at the IOU, that decision is which projects do we select for a proactive integrity review? And many of you in this room will know what a PIR is. However, for those of you who don't, a PIR is not an investigation. It is a service offering a bundle of fraud detection methods composed into workflows suitable for development finance institutions with outputs which may improve the overall control environment of the GCF in this case. Now we have over 750 projects and grants in our portfolio, but we can only do 3 to 4 PIRs per year. So we really want to select the most eligible projects or programs, especially given the fact that we don't have that many countermeasures to choose from, and this is perhaps one viable countermeasure. But why is it a viable countermeasure? Why would you want to do a PIR at all? Well, first of all, PIRs offer a risk reduction or loss control option for compliance risk and reputation risk. So when fraud is detected proactively, it tends to be detected more quickly, which leads to lower losses. And second, PIRs offer the fund the opportunity to benefit from real services. So for example, books and records inspection or asset inspection costs money and takes quite a lot of time and expertise. And PIRs allow the fund to benefit from these services at costs cheaper than in-house provision. And finally, the big one, improved disclosure. So for external stakeholders, improved disclosure on our part at the GCF offers increased transparency, which can help avoid overreaction to bad news on short-term performance because there might be a reason for it. And if risks outside the control of the GCF are hedged, then stakeholders can monitor fund performance better. But this is a decision we take only once or twice a year, and that's why we need to select projects well. How do we do that? We do it by constructing an integrity risk ranking. And that process of constructing a ranking starts with integrity risk rating using some state-of-the-art red flag detection, which we've developed. So we start with around 65,000 GCF documents, and we use those documents as inputs to applications which perform text extraction and natural language processing. And next, we have 2 machine learning models. The first model predicts whether a sentence is relevant to performance of control obligations, and the second model predicts whether such a sentence indicates non-performance. And here are some examples, both in the public domain, by the way. So in the first example, a contingency budget drawdown request was rejected for a second time. And here the first layer model predicts correctly that the sentence is relevant. And the second layer model predicts correctly that this sentence indicates non-performance. So after human review, it gets a red flag. However, there are not only red flags. In the second example, a procurement was delayed but completed on time. And here the first model predicts correctly that the sentence is relevant, and the second model predicts correctly that the sentence indicates performance. So after human review, it gets a green flag. But how did we calibrate these models, you might be wondering? Well, we at the GCF have a problem as a young institution. We lack a 20 to 30-year-old portfolio of projects for which it can be said that some subset of these projects experience weakness in performance of control obligations, whereas some other subset exhibited adequate performance or strong performance of control obligations. So what can you do in this situation? Well, you can go to an adjacent domain where there is more data. You can train your models there and then transfer those models back to the core domain for use in inference. And that is exactly what we did. We started with the World Bank Projects API using almost 70,000 documents from a relevant subset of projects similar in composition to the GCF portfolio. And then from among those documents, we used audit reports and implementation completion reports to identify and label sentences which offer meaningful statements about performance of control obligations. And there are a couple of examples up here right now. So in the first example, a project was rated satisfactory on safeguards and fiduciary compliance. Throughout its implementation, this is clearly an example of a project that was well run. And in the second example, an auditor was unable to obtain sufficient evidence to issue anything other than a disclaimer of opinion. And this is clearly an example of a red flag. So we labeled about 1,300 sentences in this manner and created what we call the project level control performance data set. Now, most peer officers within the UN system or within MDBs use an approach to project selection for PIRs based on inherent risk factors. And we were able to test this approach using the project level control performance data set, finding it to be weak. And by contrast, our sentence level models perform well enough for use in GCF operations. Specifically, our first model is 94% accurate and our second model is 93% accurate. And as such, while we have trained our models on World Bank documents, we have now transferred these models for use in inference about GCF funded activities. The highest standard of transparency in this work is reproducibility. So for technical stakeholders, we offer coding notebooks with explanations. And for all other stakeholders, we offer documentation written in plain English. And you can see some of it on your screen right now. Now, we wouldn't be able to present on risk ranking without showing you a ranking, but unfortunately, almost everything in this ranking is redacted. This is the top 10 riskiest projects by red flags detected from within a subset of our portfolio, from within an instrument called the Readiness and Preparatory Support Program, which is basically capacity building grants. Now, there are 335 grants in the ranking, so it is very, very long, and you're only looking at the top 10. But given our problems with visibility into our portfolio, it's fair to ask, that's all very well and good to have this top 10, but how much visibility has this process actually provided us? Well, it turns out we have quite good visibility, at least when we break down the data by delivery partner. So a delivery partner is someone who helps us administer a grant. And this is one of many sanity checks that we perform on our machine learning to make sure we are checking that our ranking doesn't suffer from any blind spots. So for example, perhaps some delivery partners offer disclosures and some delivery partners don't. Well, it looks like that's not the case, because if we had blind spots in this area, we would see them appear as dots in the top right quadrant. I know it looks like DP8 is potentially a blind spot, but I'll just draw your attention to the x-axis, which is log 10 scale. So our exposure to this particular DP is actually really, really small. Whereas our exposure to the DPs in the bottom right is quite a lot larger. So that's delivery partners, but what about countries? Well, it turns out that here, are there any blind spots? No, there are not. This is partly a function of how we allocate our readiness funding in a very uniform way. And these risk rankings allow us to offer a measure of portfolio quality by integrity, risk rating, and instrument. So this is the format that we report in to the senior management team and to the executive director, but this is, of course, not GCF data because there's no way I would be able to show that to you. So what I've done here instead is I've generated some data to approximate the same report. And even though this is not real data, it does show the 6 major instruments in our portfolio. And it does show the most interesting relationship that we found as a result of doing this machine learning, which we did not expect to find, which is that grant portfolio disbursements are much more exposed to high integrity risk than are disbursements for any other instrument. So that's the 2 charts along the bottom, in the middle and on the right. And this result is quite remarkable because our machine learning models knew nothing about which instrument was used for which project or program. Our models were not trained to identify sentences belonging to a grant from sentences belonging to a loan. All the models looked at was sentences without any context as to which project these sentences belong to. If there are any skeptics in the room, how much would it cost for us to do this if we were not using machine learning? Well, we've had to process a lot of documents. So there's actually so many documents that if we in the IIU now started reading these documents, we'd never finish because the number of documents doubles every year. But how many people would we need to hire? Let's just forget for a second that we have a hard constraint on the number of staff at the GCF. How many people would we need to hire in order to do the same thing as we've been able to do with machine learning? Well, there are 38.6 million sentences, 579 million words of technical and financial documentation. So if anyone knows about average reading speed, normally it's a lot higher than 75 words per minute, but if it's technical document, it's going to be a lot slower. So 75 words per minute is quite reasonable. And if you assume that your staff cost 100K a year, well, the cost of this option, doing it without machine learning, is that you have to hire 81 people in order to read all of the documents to find all of the red flags that we found using our machine learning. And that would cost you $8.1 million. And like, let's say perhaps you think that you can just pay everyone half what we would pay them and work them like 20% harder. Okay, good luck with that because it's still going to cost you $3.4 million. And so what did we actually do? We did option B, which is a lot cheaper. And we built what we call the integrity due diligence platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liam. This has been very interesting and it creates an opportunity for us to explore data and get information from the information that the GCF has. Now, what we've seen here is an opportunity where we could leverage on the information that is available in the public domain, leverage on the information that is available within the GCF, and create visualizations that allow us to extrapolate that data and make information that gives us an opportunity to manage our projects a little bit better, identify whether those risk areas are, and look to see where we need to have our prevention interventions or investigative interventions. So the work that we've done here at the IIU thus far, although we envisage growing our analytics capabilities, we do have a lot of value that has been brought to the GCF. And this is something that we've worked with some of our colleagues in the international community. And we also encourage people to get in touch with us so that we can also grow as a community as it pertains to this analytics capabilities. But, you know, I'll open up the floor a little bit later for questions. But what we'd like to do is hand the floor over to our colleague, Gaurav, who unfortunately has not been able to make it here, but is joining us remotely. Gaurav is a co-founder and executive director of CivicDataLab, a research lab that harnesses data, tech design, and social sciences to strengthen access to information and enhance civic engagements in India and other Asian countries. He works to leverage on open source movements to enable citizens to engage better with in public reform. He works closely with the government agencies, civil society organizations, think tanks, media houses, and universities to enable data-driven decision-making at scale. He has been instrumental in starting data for public good initiatives in India like DataKind, Bangalore, Open Budgets in India, Justice Hub, and Open Contracting in India. Currently, he is focusing on growing open data lead innovations in sectors like climate change adaptation, public finance, public procurement law and justice, urban planning, and more. Gaurav, you've got the floor. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Albert. It's a pleasure to join this panel, unfortunately virtually, but I have my colleague Samriddhi also there. I would request her to just step up and say hello to you folks. She's wearing black sari, so feel free to reach out to her in case you have any questions after the conference. She would be more than happy to answer some of those queries. But for the session today, we are focusing on understanding one of our critical projects in terms of disaster risk reduction in India. I would just request if we can present the slides as well, and I can keep saying next, next, next as we move forward. So the slides are also up. Then we can dive into. So as Albert was saying in my introduction, we are a research lab focused on connecting data, tech, design, and social science to strengthen access to public data in the country and also understand how citizen participation could be improved so that eventually we have much more participatory data-led governance. And today, we are going to talk about one of our case studies from initiative known as Open Contracting India. Open Contracting India is a collaboration between CivicDataLab and Open Contracting Partnership focused on increasing public procurement reforms and data-driven capabilities of various stakeholders in the country. And I would talk about our work in Assam. So just to give you context, Assam is located in the northeastern region of the country. And if you have ever drank Indian tea, most likely it's gonna have come from Assam. It's one of the largest exporter and manufacturer of tea. And it's also, unfortunately, one of the most affected state for floods in the region. And close to 4,000 hectares of agricultural land is affected every year because of floods. It is cut into two parts, Brahmaputra River, and the river unfortunately changes its course every year, and it also have a lot of international political reasons why damage the water from the dams get released at different times, and it's difficult to understand how the river path would be for every year, causing close to 3 million people being dispersed every year, and 100 plus people unfortunately lose their life on an average, and 36 million USD in terms of economic damage, property damage we suffer in the region. Also, 90% of the districts are vulnerable to floods. So floods has become a part of the lifestyle of the people here. They live with floods and they have learned to live with floods in a hard way. So when we were working in Assam, when we were looking into what kind of data sets exist, it becomes critical for us to see how can we improve the preparedness of the people in the region. So if we go into the next slide, we see what are the various data sets available out there. So 5 data sets, data sources, I would rather say, are crucial when it comes to flood analysis. Number one is satellite and weather data. So we do have an Indian satellite imagery platform known as Bhuvan, which releases timely satellite imagery information. And we also have Landsat Sentinel-2 website, which releases satellite imagery of much higher resolution. So we combine these two satellite imagery along with weather data to understand what's the situation on ground. We also have demographic data from the region collected from census, socioeconomic vulnerability information, maternal and child health, etc. All of these data sets are not very real time because they are done through surveys, etc. So they come at a bit of a delay. Assam is unique in terms of collecting damage-related information. So the Assam State Disaster Management Authority, the nodal agency responsible for disaster management in the region, one of our close partners in this project, they collect information of past damages in the day-wise information bulletin, which they collect with help of volunteers, the district level authorities, etc., and publish it on their website. So we capture that information as well, along with
Sorry, I think we lost you there.
really is the public procurement happening in the region? What is the kind?
Sorry, Gaurav, we lost you there for a little bit. If you wouldn't mind going back maybe about a minute into your, maybe a minute or two back.
Can you hear me now? Is it better?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Great. So I was just explaining the past damages data. I was also explaining about the access to infrastructure, like what is the closest public infrastructure available in the region in terms of road, public hospitals, shelters, etc. And lastly, the government fiscal response, the public procurement data, how often the public procurements are happening in the region, what kind of public procurements are happening, whether there was enough participation in them, whether there were delays, emergency procurement, the disaster relief funds, the status of that, how much was released, how much was utilized. All of that becomes crucial for this model. So close to 72 data sets encompassing from these 5 major categories. As you would have imagined, all of these exist in silos. They're not interoperable. We can't stitch them together to understand the state of preparedness of the region. That's where we started to employ machine learning techniques and statistical algorithms, which could be harnessed to understand latent variables which are hard to measure, such as government preparedness better. So we employed structural equation modeling, a modeling technique, which helps you measure the relationship between observed variables and unobservable variables. So in our case, the unobservable variable was flood preparedness of the districts in the region. So with structural equation modeling, you are able to identify these relationships better. And as Liam was mentioning in his presentation, once you start training the model and more data keep coming in, you are able to predict the situation slightly better. So that's the technique we employed. We can move to the next slide. So in terms of preparedness assessment, we wanted to go as hyper-local as possible. In Assam, we have close to 34 plus districts. The number of districts keep changing every year because of several administrative regions, and close to 180 revenue circles. Revenue circles has the most granular units where government action happens in terms of revenue collection, fund release, as well as disaster management. So we wanted to employ structural equation modeling to assess preparedness of revenue circles, all 180 revenue circles, and help government monitor this on a monthly basis, especially before the flood, during the flood, and after flood, so that the government response could be planned accordingly. And this was first ever attempt to do so because all the previous attempts which government was doing, they were struggling to do this almost on a near real-time basis. They were struggling to combine 72 variables together to make this analysis. And what resulted into absence of a model like this, most of the decisions which the Assam State Disaster Management Authority was doing happened close to on the basis of decibel level, like how loud is the demand coming from the revenue circle. Based on that, they have to release the funds. But they were very keen to employ much more data-driven mechanisms so that this decision doesn't depend on the decibel value of the revenue circle or the local politicians, but more on kind of several layers of data sets which the department is able to collate and analyze. So this is what we were able to develop over the course of last 1.5 years. You can see the red spots are the regions where high damage is happening and the preparedness is very low. While the blue spots of the scale, there the damages are low, but the preparedness, the ease of doing public procurement, release of funds is quite stable. So this is the kind of relationship we were able to discover. And with help of this model, now for every district in Assam, the disaster management authorities can prioritize their revenue circles which require maximum help in terms of improving government preparedness for the upcoming flood cycle. If we go to the next slide, I can also explain how one of the preparedness report looks like for a district. So Barpeta is one of the most damage reported district in the region. And you can see the flood proneness, the flood impact, and the preparedness score from the model. You can also see the state of several revenue circles in the district and their preparedness to respond for the upcoming flood cycle. We collated this data for last 5 years, and now we are updating it almost on a near real-time basis, so that every month such reports could be generated, and eventually we can track how revenue circles are improving their score and responses. So what a report like this helps, it enables the district level disaster management authorities to identify where the gaps are in terms of fund release, in terms of public procurement for floods. B, create a much more robust data-driven action plan for the regions which get affected the most. How can we have more effort planned towards long-term preparatory efforts rather than just immediate response and emergency procurements? So in this district, we observed that close to 60% public procurement tenders, close to 108 public procurement tenders, which happened in the last 5 years, all of them were focused on emergency response and restoration efforts, while very few, close to just 30 odd tenders, were focused on long-term preparedness in the region. So that's the shift now districts are going to take, that they need to increase the number of public procurement happening for long-term preparedness, and they need to increase from the center of the district to other districts where help is not being reached in a timely manner. So that's the kind of insight this model is able to generate. Now we are working with the Assam State Disaster Management Authority and our local partners to convert this algorithm into a preparedness tool, which would be a self-deployable open source solution, so that others can also contribute and see how this tool could be improved. And this would be deployed in Assam to begin with. And gradually we have received interest from other states in India, like Himachal Pradesh, to track impact of landslides, because it's a hilly region, as well as the coastal area in Odisha, where it's highly affected by cyclones. So looking into how well the preparedness is of several districts there, and how a machine learning approach like this can help improve the timely government preparedness in the region. So that's what we're gonna do in upcoming months. And over to you, Albert. In case we have any questions, I can address this after Lillian's presentation.
Great, thank you very much, Gaurav. The work that CivicDataLab is doing is really revolutionary because we could take the principles and techniques and technologies that they've implemented in what they're working on and apply it to the GCF so that we can identify projects that would be ideal for any specific region. We can look to see whether there are opportunities for maladaptation in our area. We can look to see how we can have our best interventions. Our next speaker is Lillian Macharia, and she is from the Green Climate Fund. She's a director of project management, and her purview really is to address project risks. Lillian she's a Kenyan national with over 24 years experience designing, structuring, and managing complex and public and private financial sector investments across Africa. Her experiences also include microfinance, civil society engagements. Since joining the GCF, Lillian has led and contributed to setting up a portfolio monitoring and management system and oversight on implementing GCF portfolio. Before joining the GCF, Lillian served 11 years at the African Development Bank and represented the AFDB in various investee company boards. Lillian, welcome. Thank you.
Okay, so many thanks, Albert. I'll try and maybe my passion doesn't drive me to be as choked up as you were in the beginning or as considered as Liam was, but I hope I'll be able to communicate. I represent the, how would I say, machine learning for dummies here. I think after these experts have done their work, they bring it to people like me to consume, and hopefully I'll be able to share with you the perspective from somebody who's learning and seeing how we apply the machine learning and the data aspects in practice. So what we'll be looking at is, as Albert has said, I am involved in overseeing the portfolio at the GCF. And remember, for us, portfolio risks come from different perspectives. It comes from the origination and structuring. It's also in the execution. And hence, we're trying to look at in which ways can we manage and mitigate that risk? Because as an institution that's working on climate, we want to make sure that our projects deliver the highest impact, but at the same time, we also manage the risk in so doing. So what I'm about to present is about what we are currently trying to develop in terms of a pipeline origination methodology, which is meant to support countries. But maybe the first question is to ask why? Why do we need this methodology? The reality is, in our support, as you might be aware, GCF supports quite a number of countries across Latin America, Africa, Asia, and Eastern Europe, to come up with projects, both in terms of developing, helping them build their capacity and readiness to come up with climate finance related initiatives, whether it's for mitigation and adaptation, but also in terms of funding, developing projects and investments that actually help mitigate against climate impacts. But what we've noticed is that countries seem to be giving us a list of projects that don't seem to have a very clear linkage to the climate challenges they are facing, and therefore the rationale for it and how those projects would necessarily address the risk they face. The second thing also is that most of even some of the projects that have been highlighted or lists, the ideas that have been shared, don't even make it to a full proposal stage. And that's because there's a bit of a gap between what the country's capacity or know-how and information they have and what is required for us to have a full-blown proposal. And what we've also then seen is related to that is countries have challenges identifying, if you don't have a clear rationale, what are they, how do you translate the challenges you have into clear project activities that would mitigate into that? And how do you measure success of those projects, implementation of those project activities in terms of impact? And what this then is leading us to is kind of noticing an increasing sense of risk in that fact that the projects that we get presented with might be maladaptive, which means, yes, they're well intended, but they may actually increase the risk of the climate impacts that they're meant to mitigate and cause more harm than good. And hence, so we've thought about, that's one of the risks that we really need to address. The second one is the mitigants and management measures included in those projects may not fully address or maybe not be aligned with the underlying risks that actually these projects face or entail. And that would mean in terms of implementation, you are likely to be faced with a lot more challenges than you expected. And that does cause its own get a life of its own. And then finally is also that the way those projects are structured, if they don't have clear articulation of risks and management of risks, it becomes really challenging to attract the appropriate financing. And as GCF, we are very keen as one of our, what we consider as our major comparative advantages, is that we are able to take higher risk and also kind of, promote blended finance, or we're able to bring in leverage private sector and mix it with the public sector financing, because public sector financing is limited. So if you're going to be able to do that, we need to have a well-structured project that private sector understands the risks and can see how those risks are managed. Now, what we've also seen is in the midst of all of this, by the time the projects come to us, it's rather late in the day. Countries have invested a lot, and it's difficult for us to really start structuring it into the appropriate structure that it needs to be. So given this, we have then thought, how about coming up with a tool that helps countries develop projects that make sense from the get-go, and we intervene in the right point. So we've come up with this project pipeline methodology that we are currently developing. It's not yet out there. It's something we're developing. And the idea is to sequence the approach to climate financing and development of projects. That is starting from a systemic assessment of climate risks, and therefore identifying where do you need the projects, what kind of projects do you need, and how do you structure them. So it starts from identifying the whole systems in terms of assessing what the risks are, etc., and then coming up to the final point where you have a project that is actually ready to be funded. And in addition to that, we are trying to help countries start identifying, for example, if you're targeting GCF, where you start applying our criteria. We have an impact potential, paradigm shift potential, country ownership, potential as part of our criteria. So you have some select criteria that you can apply so that you already know, would this meet the mark, so that you don't invest too much and then you find later that we cannot fund that project. The other thing is that we're also using our methodology to sort of be part of the foundations to help NDAs and our country partners understand how to structure projects and finance and get more financing for their climate initiatives. And the way we've structured it is such that you don't have to necessarily deploy the entire methodology. You can take slice bits and bits of it, depending on where you are in your country and maybe in your development, and see how you can apply it to help you come up with initiatives that are fit for purpose. So our methodology looks like this. This is a bit detailed. I'll just go very quickly over it. It starts with, we're trying to look at an overall infrastructure systemic approach, which incorporates climate data and risk assessment. And here we take the first part is looking at assessing climate risks and vulnerability vis-a-vis, for example, infrastructure, right? So you're mapping what kind of risks, climate hazards is a country exposed to, and what kind of infrastructure is affected, and what are the quantum of losses. Based on that, then you can look at where you have what you call the hotspots, and then do some additional studies, like we're calling the hydrological, geological, maybe there's flooding, etc., and figure out what kind of interventions and do you need to address those risks. And then with that, also you can look at what kind of technology would you require to address some of the risk and to mitigate or maybe strengthen the resilience of the infrastructure that exists. And together with that, you also apply our criteria to make sure that whatever you're doing is probably going to be sustainable. It's going to yield the climate impact you're looking for. Now, if you already know what you need to, then you also have to assess do you have the capacity to implement that, which is why I look at the capacity needs assessment of our partners, because again, we talk about GCF being country driven. And based on that, then you're able to structure something that also takes into account not only the capacity of the country, but also the needs and the ability, so that it's something that can be executed. Together with that is also, of course, the project implementation structure. And then we come through to the final screening, the comprehensive GCF investment criteria, and then we select projects for financing, and maybe also looking at where do you need to take the initiative. Some projects may require a lot more work, so you take them through a project preparation facility. Some may just need a concept note that you can further develop into a full proposal, and others you may need to think about probably working a bit more on the regulatory framework, because de-risking is not just about financial, some of it is regulatory. So with that pipeline methodology, it kind of then helps you figure out what do you need, how do you sequence your initiatives, and what do you prioritize. And what we are currently then doing is we're working with the Jamaican government under the Coalition of Climate Resilient Infrastructure. And the idea is, if you know, Jamaica is one of those small island development states. You have seasonal hurricanes that will consistently batter up the infrastructure. And that is cost, whatever, every time there's a hurricane and things have been blown off, it means then the country has to reinvest in bringing the infrastructure back to scale. So the point is to look at how can we help the country first and foremost identify the critical infrastructure assets that are most prone to climate hazards. And based on that, then look at what is the best way to mitigate and create resilience of that infrastructure against the climate hazards, whether it is flooding when it happens, and that is looking at different methodologies. So what we've done is we've partnered with a number of players. They have the Oxford University, which has come up with a systemic resilience assessment tool. And here they've gone out and worked with government and also open data to identify first the climate risks and the hazards, get the data on climate data. They've also looked at also information on assets and value of assets that are within different locations. And then mapping that, then you're able to see when a hurricane, for example, hits the Jamaica, which are the most affected, assets, and what would you need to mitigate? So that kind of then helps come up with a priority list of the most affected, the most significant infrastructure that you need to work on. And then the second part then is to look at the intervention that would then be needed to strengthen that infrastructure. It may mean you may have to shift some, you may have to make them more stronger to be able to withstand the climate impacts, so whether it's the hurricane. And then you also then define the scope of whatever intervention you might want to do. And here we look at also the technology, whether you're going to use nature-based solutions or gray infrastructure, you want to do both. And then after we've done that, then we've gone back to the partners and the stakeholders to just check, does this make sense to you? Because again, you need to make sure that it's owned by everybody. And they also have the capacity and the buy-in from the relevant actors when it comes to implementation. Then the next part then is we're currently working on developing then viable project concepts, because you've already prioritized the projects and gotten the buy-in from stakeholders, is saying which of these projects shall we run with first? And then how do we structure them? Who might be interested? Because you have to look at which ones require public sector entirely or public and private partnerships, or which ones could be really targeted for private sector only. Because again, the countries are also grappling with limited financing resources. So we have that, and then we go back, we come up with the funding strategy and how you phase those projects. And then eventually we go back to stakeholder engagement to see whether they're, where they have people who might be willing to buy into the project and finance. And based on that, then I think we're hoping to be able to come up with a methodology that we shall then apply to other countries that face similar issues. And the idea is that for us, we shall use this to be part of our readiness offering, our readiness offering, so that then it can be offered to all entities that are trying, or countries that are trying to come up with investment plans for their regions. So I'll stop here and I'm happy to provide any answers during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. We're a little pressed for time, so we do have a few questions that we had received previously, but I would like to open the floor up to audience members. If you do have any sort of questions for the panel or Gaurav, please go ahead and raise your hands and we'll have a microphone put forward to you. Nothing yet. All right, maybe for Liam. We've looked at the statistics that you provided regarding how machine learning can help save us money and how quickly it allows us an opportunity to get to the relevant data in an expeditious and effective manner. For those of us that are not familiar and do not have any sort of machine learning implementations in their organizations, what would you advise? How can we go about creating an infrastructure that gives us that opportunity to utilize machine learning capacities in our respective organizations?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Can people hear me, by the way, through this microphone? Or
Yeah.
Yes,
Coming through.
great. Okay. Well, the thing about machine learning projects is that they're highly application specific. So the example that Lillian talked about, is it JS-RAT? Yeah. That's highly specific to Jamaica and extremely useful for government ministers in Jamaica. And what we've done is very useful for us, but not necessarily entirely applicable to, let's say, organizations that don't suffer from exactly the same constraints that we suffer from. So within the context of machine learning projects being highly application specific, one big takeaway from what we've sort of learned through our own work is that open source software is an extremely useful way of going about constructing something that will work for you. Because, I mean, really the minute you procure software, you're kind of locking yourself into something. And Gaurav is a very, very persuasive speaker on this topic. So I'd be very happy if you want to chime in, Gaurav. But I think if you want to do something similar, it just depends on what you want to do. And maybe the last thing I would add is the importance of engineering skills is huge. So machine learning projects are software engineering projects. They, I think that the way machine learning is taught in school, it's taught as though it's purely a statistical enterprise, and it's not really like that. And so the integrity due diligence platform that we built is sort of a testament to that, in which we attempted to hit kind of best practices at every level. And so the reason why we have a very good audit trail is because we've got best practices at every other level beneath it, including infrastructure and services and integrations, and then the tooling that we provide for our analysts.
Thank you. You've mentioned audit trails. Can you speak a little bit about the importance of audit trails and what value that brings to our integrity initiatives and our machine learning implementations?
Yeah, sure. I think that if you work in an integrity unit, does anybody here work in a unit that's got a name like integrity? Yes. Yes, quite a few. Excellent. Okay. So then generally you'll be serving a wider organization with some services, including investigations and prevention and so on. And you might have had problems in the past with disclosure, because generally you can't disclose anything about investigations, but your stakeholders may want to know certain things from your unit. If you've ever had to investigate a senior executive, you might have created some issues between yourself and the organization that you serve. So really, if you want to do a project like this, there's going to be, let's say, quite a few important stakeholders who have some skepticism about what you're doing, and they want to know what you're doing. And so I think the way this is generally dealt with in government is that people just decide that they're going to do lots of consultations from the get-go. But that's something that could end up, you know, making your project last sort of forever, or maybe you never get off the ground because it takes a year to do all these consultations. And an alternative that I think we sort of developed here is, well, why don't you just come up with exceptionally good documentation from the outset, and then kind of make it clear that you freely offer that to your stakeholders as a way of kind of building building confidence in them in you know, the endeavor that you're undertaking.
Great, thanks, Liam. I do have a question, another question that was posed earlier to us, and this is for Gaurav. You've worked quite a bit with local government in India, civil society organizations. What advice would you give, say, us at the GCF or other colleagues that are looking to engage with governments and civil societies on machine learning? What are the experiences that you've had, and how can we leverage on that? And maybe you can inform, give us a little bit of an inkling on how we can approach that.
Thanks, Albert. So I think one lesson from India is 80% of your time would be just managing and cleaning the data. So then only machine learning and AI algorithms can work for you. And that 80% time is crucial because you can't do it alone with data engineers. You need a multidisciplinary team to work with you to make sure we are understanding each and every field of the data really well. We are also understanding the biases in which these data sets are being collected. we are also understanding the life cycle of the data, how often these are collected, and what are the kind of real life situations which this data is going through while coming to our systems, and then we are making sense out of it. So having a multidisciplinary team, having that understanding that most of the time would go into just cleaning and maintaining the data sets, and then as Liam was mentioning, deploying open source solutions just reduces your time in developing these machine learning pipelines. So pick existing machine learning algorithms, try to understand those building blocks, and see if you can tailor some of these for your use case. As Liam was mentioning, that it needs to be customized for your use case. So see if you can reuse them and customize them for the use case you are dealing with. That way you would save time, and you don't have to lock into a software which is proprietary in nature. So all of that is required. And lastly, I think engaging very closely with the implementation agencies. In our case, it was the disaster management authorities. So every time when we had some early results, we used to go back to them, see if that's making sense to them, and also look for those aha moments when they also get a bit surprised, like what's the model saying and how can we miss this? So that make them verify some of the things which we are mentioning, and ensure that we have a good validation cycle, preferably coming from on ground.
Thanks, Gaurav. And the last questions that I would like to have to, maybe I'll pose this to Liam, I'm sorry, to Lillian, then Liam, and then finally you, Gaurav. It's the same question. What is the future of machine learning and artificial intelligence in addressing project risks and promoting accountability? I'll hand it to you first, Lillian.
All right, thank you. I think it's a good start, because I think the rest can improve on my answer, given that I'm the dummy here. But I would say, especially coming from the portfolio side, I think we're getting into a world where data is becoming increasingly important, and there's a lot of interconnectedness in terms of the risks. So with the multiplicity of data sources, the data in quantum that we all have to process, and the need for us to be able to respond very quickly and in a manner that takes into account the interdependencies, I think machine learning is really, really important, because then we're able to really process a lot of data in the shortest time, give us insights that can then help us inform decisions. At least I see that from where we're looking at dealing with the varied context and a lot of information from different sources. So I think there's a lot of future hope. How you put that in technical language, I don't know, but Liam will do that for me.
You can take that.
Thank you. No pressure. I think that the way things are going now, things are changing so fast. It's really difficult to predict anything with any degree of certainty, even into the near future. But I do think that integrating artificial intelligence is something that a lot of people will try to do. And we have our own idea. I'm not sure if we can divulge anything about Lillian. I think you coined the term integrity GPT this morning. We have something in that area, but I think actually the organizations that will be leading the way, or the participants in the integrity space that will be leading the way, are actually more likely to be slightly well-resourced companies of the sort that you used to manage, boss, such as KPMG and so forth. So to the extent that anyone here wants to try and push, what you're doing to the like the bleeding edge, you're going to need to hire some engineers, which is not something that people in this space are used to doing.
Thanks, Liam. Liam and Lillian, over to you, Gaurav.
I would just like to add what Lillian and Liam were mentioning, that we would see more and more AI use cases coming in the space, and there's a huge potential. At the same time, there are risks. Some of them are identified, and some of them we are going to identify in future. So more and more, we continue to make our AI and machine learning models open, transparent, and accountable. More it would be beneficial for all of us. And the only way it's going to happen is to make sure we open up the right data sets, we open up these algorithms for regular criticism, and also at the same time try to make the AI models more ethical, more responsible, and explainable in nature. So that's the only way I think we would be able to apply them for critical issues like these and help more and more people with it.
Thanks, Gaurav. Well, thank you very much, everybody. We seem to be out of time, but I think it's really important to take away from this is that machine learning and artificial intelligence opens up a lot of opportunities for synergies. We here in the stage and Gaurav in India are all huge proponents of open information, open data, open source. And we do encourage engagement in that space. Please reach out to us. We look forward to working with you. But otherwise, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, panelists, for being here with us. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.